Hello and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I get together and go over the week's events in the world of Scientology as reported on Tony's Substack. What a week. Hey, Tony, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, Chris. Good to be here.
Yeah, good stuff. This week, we did have some things to discuss, starting with an article you published about a Scientology documents and a little bit of a window into how Miscavige was trying to direct things. And what was this all about?
Well, Pete Griffith sent it to me, and he hadn't seen it before. I had not seen it before, but I looked into it. It has been online before. It's dated 1996. WikiLeaks put it online in 2008, so it's been around. But I never discussed it. So I thought it was worth talking about. It refers to something called the Clear Expansion Committee, and it's written by the ED International. And what I like about it is it spells out in black and white what is meant by Scientology clearing the planet. And that is what he's doing in this document is he's really exhorting all these different Scientologists and Scientology groups and organizations saying you all have to work together on this. We all have to, everybody from the orgs to the staffs to the front groups, Narconon, executive directors, everybody's got to be involved in this effort. And then he just spells it out. Clearing the planet basically means creating a Scientology world. Now, we all knew this, Chris, but sometimes reporters and other news organizations are very skittish about this kind of thing. So it's nice to have it right there in black and white. You can show it to them. Look, this is what they're really trying to do. I know that they say they set up an applied scholastics here or Narconon there, and it's just to, help the local community or whatever. No, there's an effort going on. That effort is coordinated between different Scientology groups, and it is to literally prepare the world for Scientology takeover. Now, it's not going to happen. It's a small group. They're always acting like they're more important than they are. But it's good to know that that is the aim. So, so Pete gave it to me because he said, "Look, here's real evidence about Narconon being involved." And that's the thing is you still see to this day when news organizations talk about Narconon, they will say it has a tie to Scientology, and I have to, it just drives me crazy. I said, "No, you can only operate a Narconon under a license from the Association for Better Living and Education, ABLE. And ABLE is only staffed by Sea Org members. It is a branch of Scientology. Narconon is Scientology. It's not affiliated with or tied to Scientology. Narconon is Scientology." And here's a document showing that Narconon executive directors are expected to take part in this Church of Scientology effort to take over the world. So for that reason, I like to see it spelled out like that so plainly. And it even offers up some examples of how a sort of effort towards drug abuse could be coordinated using the Narconons to help Scientology expand in that direction. So it goes into some good detail that way. And I really thank Pete for bringing that to my attention. Like I said, it's been out there, but I don't think there's been a whole lot of attention on it. And again, it's just great to have it spelled out so plainly. But this had some real resonance for you, Chris?
Oh, very much so. Yes. And I wanted to break down why, because the 1995 is the year I joined the Sea Org. In 1996 is when two major things happened at the orders of and planning of David Miscavige. And this was probably the moment where he first and most powerfully exerted his direct control over the management and structure and forward path of Scientology. Up until this time, 1996, Scientology operated on the idea of making a lot of auditors who are going to go make a lot of clears. And through this numerical supremacy, we're going to gradually take over the orgs are going to be these islands of sanity, and we're going to expand from them. And this was the plan for world domination, if you want to put it that way. And that is certainly how we thought about it in Scientology. So it's hilarious to me to hear, of course you want it in writing. Of course you want the proof of it. But I'm telling you, I was so steeped in it, it never occurred to me that we were doing anything else but taking over the world as a Sea Org member and Scientology staff member. That was my attitude, right? And that around me. But let me tell you real fast about this, because 1996, this issue that you're citing is one of 3 binders of issues that Miscavige had written and sent down as part of what was called the New Era of Management. And this was a whole Scientology reorganization. It was a big moment in Scientology history that is lost to the past, but it happened and it was a big deal. Every single Sea Org management unit got new command teams. Like the entire planet was reorganized Scientologically. And and those binders described new jobs, new organizations, and this front group organization that you describe, which is in this issue so plainly laid out, was a very new thing for all of us in 1996. And Miscavige set Scientology on a path of expansion through the front groups: Narconon, Criminon, Applied Scholastics, all those, Way to Happiness Foundation. And then in 2001, it got a supercharge because of 9/11.
Right.
Those 2 things happened. So I thought I would throw that out there just as some, kind of hidden Scientology history or whatever, as you put these issues out there and they show you this window into what these guys are really all about. And actually it was part of a much bigger picture at that time that obviously didn't work. And we'll talk later in the show about why, but that was a thing I wanted to throw out there on this particular article.
Well, and also, thank you for putting that in its context of the time. Like I said, it was dated 1996. It was supposedly written by the ED International, who at that time was a man named Guillaume Lesev, who's been in the hole forever.
That's right.
Yes, this weekend at the bunker at the group therapy podcast, I asked Bruce Hines, who was in the Sea Org in the 80s, and then Alex Barnes Ross, who was a staffer in the 2010s. In your eras, was there this same idea that all these groups are going to pull together and you're going to take over the world? They said absolutely. See, and the reason I asked them that was that, if you put this, if you could somehow get Scientology to answer any questions, they never will, but if you could ask them, Corinne Powell, what about this 1996 document that lays out your goals? One of the first things they'll say is, well, that's 1996. It's got nothing to do with today. And so I just wanted to confirm with somebody that had been active in the 80s in the Sea Org and somebody in the 2010s, it's the same goal at all times. It does not change.
Absolutely not. It's at the level of Scientology culture. It's just by the time you're involved in Scientology for about a month or 2, you're going to start hearing about this. And within a year, you're going to be fully on board. That's about how it works.
I see.
All right. Yeah, good stuff. So the second thing we had were some tidbits from some insiders. There were a couple of them. What was this story about?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I had built up quite a collection of messages, mail, emails from some of the readers. I have these wonderful readers that send me stuff from inside Scientology because they're still on the mailing list or they're still sort of under the radar. And we got a number of them. And I figured I had to get them out because I knew we had some other things coming. And so one of them was a woman advertising her services, for example, to watch people's kids when they're at Flag. And this actually got a big reaction from people because I think it was Jason Begay who first explained to me the Flag experience, that, you've been in Scientology for a while, you've been going up the bridge, but at some point, no matter where you are in the world, you have to go to Clearwater, Florida to the Flag Land Base for certain particular processes like OT6 and OT7, which you can't get anywhere else in the world. And it's a real hardship for people because they have to, put up, close up their house or their business or whatever in Los Angeles or London or wherever, fly to Florida, and it can take weeks and weeks. Like Jason was explaining to me, you might go there because you think you're going to drop 50 grand on L11, but then they make you wait 4 or 5 weeks to go through like a what's it called, a false purpose rundown to make sure you're not there on behalf of the FBI or something, right? And so,
Right.
this 4 week trip you plan turns into 7 or 8 weeks. You're paying for accommodations the whole time. It gets incredibly expensive. And also the question I hadn't thought about before: what about your kids? And so that was interesting about this advertisement from this posting from this woman. It's like listing her qualifications that she can put your kids through word clearing as you're going through your processes at Flag. And I don't know, this really resonated with a lot of people who, ex-Scientologists reading, who thought that was remarkable to see that posting.
Yes. Yeah. It's funny how you could call it the Scientology ecosystem, maybe.
Yeah.
Sort of thing that builds up around it. And this is exactly the kind of thing you see as individual Scientologists trying to, oh, pick me, because I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. It's, taking care of your place or watching your kids or giving you a job or whatever. But it is interesting how that happens. And I also had to laugh because one of the other notices or one of the other things you posted had to do with some seminar or convention or something about, or somebody getting graduated on something, and they talked about the ancient practice of laying on hands and how Scientology was going to teach people how to do this or something with the assists. Was that what, did I get that right?
Yeah, so it's interesting to me because Scientology to Scientologists is always pitched as a science, and that L. Ron Hubbard was this scientist who discovered real scientific truths about the human mind and about past lives, and that when you're using the e-meter, you're making a scientific investigation into your own past. That this is really, that's why Scientologists will say it's not a belief system. You're not asked to believe anything. It's demonstrated to you as truth and science and all that. And even the Scientology advertisements, they talk about the intersection of science and religion, right? But what about assists? I mean, assists are just flat out faith healing. There's just no question that, you're told that the person's lying there and you run your fingers over their body. You don't actually touch them, but somehow that's supposed to rearrange the communication of their different body parts and make them heal. I mean, it's just flat out faith healing. And it's interesting in this particular case where they were doing a graduation at Flag, and the sort of day's sermon was going to be on the laying on of hands. Now, whether they were contrasting that with assists or comparing it, I can't tell you. I just thought that was very odd that would be the subject of a quote sermon in their chapel as they were nominating new ministers. So this is about as churchy as it gets at Scientology, right? And they're talking about laying on of hands. So I thought that was really interesting. And then I contrasted that with an advertisement for a convention on the Freewinds where it's all the other kind of language, infinity and power. And, it's like there's no religion sounding terms at all. It's one of the, I think, most interesting sort of schizophrenic parts of Scientology is that they know they have to use this churchy language for their tax exempt status. But what draws people really into Scientology is not religion. It's this idea that they're scientifically going to make you a super person. So anyway, just some fun little item tidbits from the week that showed some of that schizophrenia, I think.
Absolutely. It's fun how to see these sort of products of the way Scientology has reinvented itself about 3 or 4 times publicly with marketing approach. So you do have this modern take of gleaming chrome science and metal and all of this, whereas in the 60s and 70s, it was, hey, man, you got to free your astral body, let's get out of your body. Let's that kind of thing is more hippy dippy. And the legacy of that is things like this, where they kind of have this old school appeal to ancient knowledge and how they used to know what they were doing back when they were laying on hands. But then they want to contrast that with the modern messaging of, no, we're the only ones who ever know anything about anything. Nobody else knew anything at all. It's all bunk, right?
That's
And
right.
you can find statements from Hubbard to support both of those points of view, of
You
course.
can. You're absolutely right. Yes.
And that's the funny thing about the way they can really be, they're chameleon like, let's put it that way. There we go.
Yeah.
All right. So then we had a list of donors, the whales come a calling. What was this about?
Yeah, so this was the week's big news. Back in October, they held their annual IAS gala in East Greenstead. The second time they've held it there since they brought it back, when they couldn't hold it for a few years because of the pandemic. But so they're back to East Grinstead. They're under the big tent. It's 3 days. We know Alex Barnes Ross was out there all 3 days protesting outside. We weren't sure what was going on inside. We have to wait until Scientology puts out Impact Magazine. And it's in that magazine where they really show you what happened in the event. So that just came out. And a thing I always look for, the thing that I've really paid a close attention to for years and years, is who are the big donors getting the new trophies. And I get a lot of questions about this. People are very confused. The way it works in Scientology is they turn it into a game so that if you've given like $500,000 to the IAS over your whole career, they give you a trophy saying that you're silver meritorious. But they give you an even bigger trophy if you can get to $1 million, and then they call you gold meritorious. So they turn it into a little bit of a game, and they're called statuses. And one of the things I've done over the years is really done my best to try to, get the reality of these statuses and what they're worth. So this is when we learn who got what. And I've never seen so many people. This is just one of the biggest lists I've ever seen. I had to break it up into 3 separate blog posts where I had the folks that were only given 10 to 50,000, real kind of low level, the people in the middle that were given like $500,000, and then the really big whales, the Leviathans, who are 5, 10, $20 million just to the I. And keep in mind, that's just to the IAS, the membership organization. So, like for example, Tom Cummins is, always number 2 on the IAS behind Trish Duggan, and he has given $55 million now to the IAS. But in his little bio note, it mentions that nobody has given more to individual ideal orgs than Tom Cummins. And remember, that's separate. So he may have given $55 million to the IAS, but he's probably given 15, 20 more million to these individual ideal org programs. So there's so much money involved. Trish Duggan, again, is always number 1. We don't even know what she's given is approaching $500 million now. And they don't even, they gave up trying to come. They always give a new status name, but it's silly. But anyway, we got to see who all these folks are, and the amazing amounts of money. Now, what was new this time, not only was it a very, very long list, but for everybody with $1 million and more, they gave a little biographical note. And they haven't done that before. They would say that, so-and-so from Tampa. But now they're saying whether they were involved in Way to Happiness Foundation or Drug Free World, or if they're a particular org, what industry they might be in. That was very interesting. So I made sure to, made notes of all of those. So we really got a good sense. Now, the other question I always get is, where was Grant Cardone this time? Where was Nancy Cartwright? And something to keep in mind is, you only get invited and you only get a trophy if this year you happen to pass that next level. So it doesn't mean that Grant Cardone didn't give money this year or, isn't still a Scientology donor. It's just for whatever reason, he hasn't quite reached that next plateau. And so he's not going to be recognized this year. And also, I think with the celebrities, I think they ask not to be recognized because they know we're going to publish this list. We're getting, hey, they want the word out. We're helping them get the word out. Here are all the people keeping Scientology in business in 2024. So I encourage you to go to TonyOrtega.substack.com. You can see the whole list right there. And maybe you'll know somebody. Maybe, that's always fun as we hear from people and say, oh, I knew that person in Scientology, or I know what business they're in, that kind of thing. So we get a sense of who it is that, even at this point, after all the controversies and all the bad press, who is still forking over huge amounts of money.
Big time. And in a way, this list is the real keeping Scientology working list, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right. These are the people who are keeping it afloat. It's not a wonderfully self-sustaining operation. It needs, all of this for all those legal fees, and they got to supplement the org income somehow, bail them out all the time. They got, these ideal orgs aren't buying themselves apparently. So that's what all this money is used for. One thing I wanted to comment on as well, which I'm really happy you put in, is their locations, because it also gives you a little bit of an idea of where Scientology is being funded. And obviously a bunch of names are from the United States, not more than a couple right in Florida. But I also noticed, Taiwan and Venezuela and some of these other locations as well, European locations. And it seems, if you watch the demographics of how old some of these whales are, some of them are quite up there, versus some of the younger whales who are not from America. It's a thumbnail analysis. I didn't run any numbers, but it appeared to me that they are not getting as much money from new young folks in America as they are from international locations. Thumbnail, if somebody wants to dive into that and take a good hard look at that, it might be an interesting thing to put together.
Right.
Okay. Then we had Miscavige's speech at this event, and that was also worth an article.
So last year we got very fortunate that a audio recording of Miscavige giving his so of the 3 nights at the IAS, Friday night is when he gives his big 3-hour speech about the state of Scientology. Saturday night is when the patrons ball, when they recognize these people and they get their trophies. The Friday night address, an audio recording of it was leaked last year, and Alex Barnes Ross put it on YouTube, and I put the transcript up. And we get to see what he was actually saying. It's kind of torturous to go through it, to tell you the truth. This year, nobody's leaked audio this year so far. However, in Impact Magazine, they had his closing words from Friday night, and I thought it was interesting because, this time it was the 40th anniversary of the IAS. And so sort of the theme of the night was to go over the past battles of Scientology, like tax-exempt status and the Portland Crusade and all that. And then he kind of finished on a note where he sort of acknowledged that it's kind of rough to be a Scientologist. The press is against you, and there's all these, things going on, battles we have to fight. I thought it was interesting that he actually kind of acknowledged that. And of course, he then tries to use it to say, "Oh, it's just the beginning of the great future we have." But I think, well, actually, this has been kind of a hassle. So I thought that was interesting that he actually kind of went there. Did you see that in that too, Chris?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. In fact, I'm going to say this because I think you're absolutely right. But at the same time, I'll say this from my own experience: 30th anniversary, 20th anniversary. I mean, I was kind of around for those. It was the same speech.
Oh, okay.
Because it helps us versus them, the audience. It helps firm their resolve.
Yeah.
And it puts their we're fighting a fight. And if there is one thing we know from group psychology, it is that you unify people by having a common enemy. And that is what Miscavige is really good at reminding Scientologists of in his speeches. And so I found it to be actually very same to the messaging I was getting as a Scientologist. But is that hardly a surprise given how effective it is on that audience? So that was my thinking on that one. And finally, and I do urge y'all to read the whole article and check it out, because because even without Dan Sherman around, he's still pulling the verbal, assault on his members. The language in Scientology is loaded, and it is an interesting thing to check out and study. Okay. Finally, we had an anniversary this week of a tragedy and historical event in Scientology. What was this one?
Well, every December 5th comes around, it's time to recognize what happened to Lisa McPherson on December 5th, 1995. She had a mental breakdown and had been taken to the hospital, and Scientologists pulled her out of the hospital. They did not want her to get psychiatric care. And so they locked her up in a cabana room at the Fort Harrison Hotel and kept her there for 17 days doing the introspection rundown, which is basically that nobody talks to her for 17 days as she went absolutely insane and died of dehydration. I mean, they can argue that that's not what it was, but it was. She just wasn't taking in liquids, and they couldn't force her, and she died of dehydration in their care. I mean, it's just so disgusting that they watched this poor woman deteriorate day by day. And it became so she died in 1995. It wasn't until like a year later. I think Jeff Jacobson was the amazing person who noticed that there was some kind of a police call involving a death at a particular address that he recognized, and he notified a reporter. And then suddenly they realized, oh, there was a death at the Fort Harrison Hotel. I mean, it was just not on anybody's radar until Jeff, who I think was either in Arizona or South Dakota at the time, happened to see online this police listing and happened to know the address of the Fort Harrison Hotel. And he put two and two together. So he notified a reporter. A reporter then started looking into it. And so it wasn't until like 96, a year later, that it became a story that, hey, somebody died at the Fort Harrison under really unusual circumstances. By 1998, the Church of Scientology had been indicted criminally. That doesn't happen very often, where an institution gets charged with a crime the way a person would. And there was also a civil lawsuit being brought by the family of Lisa McPherson. That became like the biggest fight for survival in Scientology's history since Snow White in the 70s. And, Mike Rinder has talked about this, how he and Marty Rathbun were basically camped at the Clearwater Bank building and just day after day dealing with ways, how can we fight against these judges and stuff. And Marty has said they spent $30 million to influence judges and stuff to get those cases thrown out. And really, it's just one of those incredible parts of Scientology history that will never be forgotten. And I would say not just because of all the criminal stuff and then the court fight and all that, but she died because of Scientology's quack mental health ideas, which could happen again at any time. I think that's the big lesson, is that Scientology hasn't changed anything about the way it approaches mental health problems. And this is very likely to happen to somebody else. And then we see somebody like Whitney Mills, who died just a couple of years ago, basically from some of the same ideas that they were refusing. Right. They were keeping her from getting proper mental health care. So this is going to happen again and again in Scientology until somebody really does something. And so I think that for that reason, we should remember Lisa every year. She should never have been treated this way. She deserved better. And so every December 5th, I reprint the article about her terrible, terrible final hours and what that was like for her. So yeah, this is the week that we go through that, and I think it's important to people. I get a lot of readership on that, a lot of response. People do care that we do that every year.
Big time, big time. Yeah. This is it's a very important anniversary and a very, very important story to keep front and center every year, because it is one of the most prominent and easiest ways to communicate to people just exactly how bad this stuff gets. It gets to the point where people will die. It can be that bad. There was another thing that I believe is a consequence of this that I wanted to mention in today's show, since we talked about that Clear Expansion Committee and the front groups and the New Era of Management stuff that happened in 96. Same time all this was going down.
Right.
right? Miscavige is in a position where he's trying to really take the reins of Scientology in the 1990s from having usurped it in the 80s and establishing himself and getting himself on Nightline and getting the IRS victory, which really put him on the top. I mean, everybody accepted him at that point.
Right.
So then he's like, okay, I got to lead this thing. And he sets up a new management structure and he puts these issues in place. Like I said, 3 binders of issues. I mean, it was a big deal. And what happens? Lisa McPherson dies.
Yeah.
And it's not immediately out there, but within a couple of years it is. And he's facing prison time. He is looking at his organization possibly being taken down. It never got that close since 77, 78, right? So his response, throw a bunch of money at it. Marty has admitted as well that he destroyed evidence.
Right.
And we know for a fact that they went after that medical examiner to change that cause of death to accidental to get them off the hook and make the whole thing go away. They fair game that woman until they ruined her professionally and she quit her job and retired. And that was the last thing she did.
And then died.
Oh, and then died. That's right.
And she probably died early because of all that stress. I have no doubt about that.
Absolutely broke her. So that's Scientology at its worst, right? Is somebody dies, they cover it up, they spend millions. But you know what happened there also is that entire strategy that Miscavige had to get those front groups, those non-Scientology appearing groups, Applied Scholastics, Narconon, Criminon. This was before there were a bunch of Narconon deaths. This was before anybody thought badly about these groups. And it derailed all of it because suddenly Scientology and anything connected to it was just toxic as hell. Right? And none of those front groups had any forward motion. Now, there's other reasons for that, including incompetence, mismanagement, all the other things that Scientology is famous for. But that Lisa McPherson, in a way, was responsible for Scientology not really taking off in a point of time where they were actually positioned to.
Yeah.
That's something that doesn't get talked about a lot, so I thought I'd throw that out there.
That's interesting. Well. Yeah. It has been a long, slow decline since that period. I would say early 90s was the kind of the peak in the membership and influence in Hollywood and that kind of thing. Then I think that combination of the Time Magazine story, the Lisa McPherson thing had started it on a declining path, and it's been there ever since. You know, they really have never recovered from those scandals.
Exactly. And so public face. Oh, and then of course, you know, what, 6 years later, 7 years later, you know, Anonymous happens. So they really weren't getting very many breaks. You know, it was one after another after another. All right. So there's some Scientology history, a little window into that for you this week, guys. So that's the past. Any idea, Tony, about future stories for this week?
Well, you know, it's the holidays, and so I've got a wonderful piece from Val Ross this week about what Scientology Christmas, what Christmas means to a Scientologist, and I'm hoping that it's such a wonderful piece. It'll be out when you put out this video, and I hope it inspires some other people to maybe send me their stories of what Christmas was like before they got into Scientology, what it was like when they were in Scientology, and what it has become since they have left. She told that story, and I got to tell you, it really hit me hard, and I hope everyone enjoys that.
Awesome, folks. Okay, so as I say every week, the address for Tony's Substack is right there on the screen under his smiling visage there, so you can go to it, subscribe, get your daily notifications, read the stories, and then come here for the wrap up on Mondays, and we'll be here for you. See you guys next week. Bye-bye.